Welcome to the Regeneration podcast. I almost said broadcast. And I'm Michael Martin, your host today, all by himself, because Mike Sauter, my brother in arms, is indisposed. So I'm flying solo today. And I'm really looking forward to this discussion with Jamie Kohanyi, who is a psychotherapist. And you're in the LA area?
I'm in San Diego.
You're in San Diego, even farther south.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to talk to her because in a topic I've been interested in since I was a kid. So here's a little story. So probably, I don't know, 1978 or 79, maybe the beginning of 1980. I would walk home from school, which was about a mile and a half away. And there was I called it the junk store, but it was like a resale shop, almost a flea market. This is in Detroit back in the 1970s. And they would sell, I'd buy books or clothes. I think I bought a Marine jacket there. But the one time I went there and they had a whole bunch of magazines, old magazines out that they were trying to unload for like a quarter a piece. And there was one, I can't remember if it was Life or Look magazine, but it was about LSD. And it probably was published in the early 60s, like 62, 63. So I bought it. It's kind of an interesting topic. And it was interesting to look at it because, in the late 70s, when I was a kid, there was this is after the hippies, and this is getting into the punk era. And the idea of psychedelics was, taboo, especially for, Irish working class Catholic like I was. And yet I brought it home, and I was really fascinating. It was the kind of kid that liked to read things, that were out of the norm. And it was really fascinating. I remember one thing, I don't know why this sticks out. I think Timothy Leary was in there. I think it was before he got bounced from Harvard. But there was this one guy in there, like as a mathematician, who would take LSD once a week with his cat. He would give his cat some LSD. I remember that sticks out in my memory. But it's kind of a fascinating topic to me because, and that's why we're going to talk to Jamie today, because a few weeks ago, it was on Father's Day. Two of my kids, well, how many of my kids? 7 out of 9 were home. And I was having a conversation with my eldest and my middle child, or 33 and 22 respectively. And they were, and the 22-year-old, who was this kind of voracious reader, he's interested in everything, asked me if I had any experience with lucid dreaming or knew anything about DMT. And I really didn't know any. Well, I think lucid dreaming, I think I've tried it. But it's not something I pursue. But DMT, I really never thought about too much at all. And he started telling me these stories that he'd been reading. He read this book on it. He'd watched some podcasts with Joe Rogan, etc. But the 33-year-old piped up, and one of his friends had been taking DMT trips. And DMT, for those of you, is dimethylene trip. What is it called? Tryptamine, dimethyltryptamine, which is not a hallucinant, a psychedelic. Well, what happened? So it happened to his friend. He took it a few times, this kid, and the first time he took it, he saw the fairies or the elves, and they were kind of nice and friendly and everything. Second time he took it, they were still there. But after a few times, one time he went into his trip, and from what I understand, these trips are really short but really intense. But one time the elves told him, "Hey, buddy, you're not supposed to be here. Don't come back." And he went back, and then they got mad at him and they yelled at him, "Don't ever! We told you not to come back. You're not supposed to be here. This is not for you." And so it was kind of fascinating, and I wrote about it in my Substack and about some other things as well. And Jamie wrote me an email talking and mentioning that she, in her practice as a psychotherapist, has also had experience with using not DMT, but psychedelics as ways to help people come to terms with their being. So welcome to the podcast, Jane.
Thank you. Gosh,
So,
even just like your intro, where do we start?
well, that's it. I mean, so let's start. When did you first become aware of such a thing as psychedelics?
So, such a thing as psychedelics, I mean, my first church, like many people, was the Church of Rock and Roll, and
Right.
I became interested in psychedelics probably as a teenager when I was at music school. Were my first, so to clarify, I graduated from Berklee College of Music, but would go up there in the summer as part of a program for musicians. And I had my first exposure to psilocybin recreationally. And I guess, I can share really personally because it kind of sums up my whole story in a sense. So music was for me kind of like a lifeboat in a lot of ways.
Same here.
That I had a childhood that had a lot of suffering inside of it, a lot of good inside of it too. But I had some pretty significant wounds that really were in need of healing. Music was a part of that. And I didn't know when I first tried psilocybin that I was getting into a world of healing at all. I, at that time, had no orientation at all that I was going to end up becoming a psychotherapist or in a healing profession. I knew that I loved to do music, but I wasn't much of a performer. That's not really my personality. And so the first time that I took psilocybin, I started in a field with some friends, and I had some headphones on, and I was listening to Bach, actually.
Oh boy.
First time. So I came up with Bach in my ears, and in my whole being, I had a sense that I live in a completely impeccably ordered universe, and that all of the parts fit together in a harmonious way. And I opened my eyes and I looked in front of me, and for just a moment, I was in a field that was in a city. I was in Boston. And I looked out onto the street, it was not necessarily an ordinary consciousness, a beautiful scene. There's homeless people, there's loud arguments and buses and cars and noise. Mm-hmm. And I had a kind of view of it of, isn't it perfect? And that journey came to a close, but that impression was extremely healing and started to reorient my life, which was, I had really been preoccupied, like many teenagers are who are in pain, with escaping.
Yeah.
I wanted to get out. I took psilocybin to get out and was surprised to learn that I didn't get out, that I went in. And I think that was sort of my first real curiosity about psychedelics. And then I really started to notice that there's a really different experience that people were having that I was not having, who were taking psychedelics to get high or to have big experiences. Mm-hmm. I got a big experience by grace, but I wasn't trying to party necessarily from that point forward, and I wasn't trying to run away. That I had this sense of this nascent God
Right.
I didn't know where it was located at that time. People who don't know me will be surprised to learn that somehow this journey has landed me in the Catholic Church, which is an interesting spot. I remember at one point, actually, in an experience like this, asking, if there is a God, I want to see your face, but please make it anything but the Catholic Church. Because I was a wild girl. And that I associated the church with just limits and just a lot of baggage and a lot of projection.
So what was your religious background, if any at all?
Yeah, that's helpful. So I grew up in a Reformed Jewish family. And so we were not particularly theistic or observant in any way. We were cultural Jews for the most part. My mother had a kind of wild mystic streak in a way. She grew up Christian, but she had converted to marry my father to Judaism. And interestingly, she was the one that sort of held whatever ritual practice we had with Judaism, sort of more even than my father, who was, I would say, bordering atheism. And so we had a kind of smorgasbord in our house of ritual activity, because my mother's side of the family there were some Catholics, there were some lapsed Catholics, there were some Lutherans, and then on my father's side of the family, there were Jews of different levels of observation, but mostly Reformed Jews. So I did have some early childhood experiences if I had a grandmother figure who took care of me, who was Catholic. And I think she attended daily mass, and she would bring me in there with her. And I have some sense memory of being there, actually. I remember what the space was like, and I remember what it felt like to be in there. But that was my real only formal contact with the church. And then most of my obsession with the church really later on was sort of as a militant feminist, as a teenager, very angry at what I thought the Catholic Church was. So it's been a big ride.
And so how old were you when your initial psilocybin experience?
I was probably about 16.
16, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Because and it's interesting that you wanted to see God, and that's when I remember. I was definitely, your biography sounds very much like mine.
Mm-hmm.
Where various levels of childhood trauma,
Mm-hmm.
but also the salvation for me was the guitar, right? That was my way out. I always tell people in the 70s, working class Catholic kids had three choices: the military, the factory, or rock and roll.
Mm-hmm.
I went for rock and roll because I couldn't imagine the other two.
Mm-hmm.
But I would, like you. I had a kind of my family was pretty Catholic. I don't think we had a Bible in the house, but we went to church every week.
Mm-hmm.
But there was also, what intrigued me in that when I read that Life magazine when I was 17 or however old, this idea of finding metaphysical truth that people reported from that. That's what interested me, right? And so when I was a little older and I heard about people, experimenting with psilocybin or LSD, it was intriguing to me because it's, I was all in for being enlightened. Right. And and of course, if you know your music history about the Beatles, right, and their experiences with LSD, and you can tell with the Beatles, man, when you can tell the day they started taking acid, because they went from an English pop band to what they were later, right, which is very different. And it's interesting too, because I was, preparing for our discussion today, watching a few videos on YouTube with people with their DMT experiences, including Joe Rogan's interview with Rick Strassman, I think it is, who wrote a book about that my son was raving about. And it's, in fact, one woman was actually in this video I saw was talking about kind of being a lapsed Catholic. She's actually a neuroscientist, and she found herself at the Last Supper, and so many of these people felt connected to everything, you know, whether it was through DMT or through acid or LSD. And in fact, I mean, you've probably seen, in fact, I can even pull it up for a second here. Let me see if it works. Okay, can you see that?
Looks like it's coming. Yeah, I can see it.
Now, this is a woman from 1950s. This is before I was born. Who, this is when people in your profession, psychologists, would do a lot of experimenting with LSD and subjects. So here, let's hear what she has to say. Can you hear that?
Why? You shouldn't say anything about anything not being. This is reality. This is. So look right over there.
Yeah, what should I say? No, I can't quite see it.
You can't see it, then you never know it. Feel sorry for you.
Okay, so the 1950s, and they were doing these experiments, and people were having, you know, I mean, probably not all blissful experiences, I'm sure. There were some bad trips involved, but at least it's interesting to me that scientists were interested in consciousness in those days. And you saw this happen with Timothy Leary later, where, of course, he was an academia at Harvard of all places. No wonder he thought it was stupid after taking after going on psychedelics. So it's kind of interesting, and it's also been interesting the last few years, and this is where your work comes in, where psychedelics have made a re-entry into the practice of psychotherapy.
Yeah, and so the first thing I think is like a kind of cool thing to think about in a way is psychedelics really never left healing. Just in our mainstream medical Western model, they were illegalized and they stopped being used, right? And really, in part, they've reemerged in a lot of ways because there's clearly a lot of research out there that is now showing the incredible potential. But I think that container needed to happen in a way because we're looking at now, if we're going to reintroduce psychedelics into medicinal use and into healing use, how are we going to respect what you said? That these are pretty powerful, potent experiences that people are having. These are big medicines.
Yeah.
And what kind of guidance do we need to encounter the people who want to just get high or escape?
Right.
I want to say something about both of those things too. When we hear both of those terms, get high and transcend or escape, I can't help but see that longing as part of a longing for God. It just gets misguided. And I think that that's like what Carl Jung was talking about when he talked about the religious nature of the psyche in part, is that we have, right? we all have the universal experience of our hearts will be restless until we rest in God.
Yeah.
We have that. And so we long and we crave to kind of get high because I think we're longing for the ultimate. And so what we're looking at now is if these medicines are coming back, like in Oregon, for example, part of the legalization process is they're legal for use with priests, pastors, people who are in that sphere, people like me who are working in psychotherapy, and people in the medical profession. So they're considering how do we use this medicine in a way how it's been used in other cultures for a long time, where basically there was some guidance around this work. So that's my real kind of fear in a way also about some of the stories that I hear about just recreational DMT as an example.
Mm-hmm.
That any, like just a basic premise of psychedelic therapy is that your mindset, your intentionality, and the setting that you are in are the scaffolding of your entire experience. And so a bunch of kids in a basement doing DMT sounds pretty scary to me, to be honest. But that could be my judgment, but I think it's my best prudence at this point that it looks like, especially that some substances, many would say, are kind of like they're a big experience to integrate. So a big part of psychedelic assisted psychotherapy is this arc, which is you're doing preparation work with a person, they're having medicine experiences, and then they're having integration. And the most important part of the work is the integration, is after you've had, let's say, this visionary experience where you have seen something life-changing, how do you then integrate that into your life and use other non-drug extraordinary states like meditation, prayer, music making, art making, and the non-ordinary state that we induce every night when we dream? How do we integrate all of this into holiness or becoming whole? Right?
That's
and
good.
So I think that there's a lot of incredible potential, and I think there needs to be a lot of reverence for how this is going to look.
Yeah, and I think that's important, because when I think about, say, a bunch of 15 or 16-year-olds doing DMT in the basement, people don't come back sometimes, right? So I certainly saw a lot of that when I was young, and we also know, I don't want to get too conspiratorial here, but we also know various government agencies saw what was happening with those substances and did their own research, which was not necessarily intended to help the subject.
Absolutely. And
Right.
that we are, I think when we open this door to the numinous, we could even say, in a sense, when we open our heart to prayer, we're opening a lot of things to potentially come in, right? Which is why in most traditions, there's some equivalent to making the sign of the cross before you pray, because you are opening that door and you're creating your mindset of how you go through. I can't think of a tradition that doesn't have something like this. And, but nobody would ever say, don't pray, because there's a risk.
Right.
So that's sort of my relationship with psychedelics, is that there's probably a place, probably a season, probably a purpose, probably an absolutely beneficial, perhaps completely transformational use of this experience. But a psychedelic experience, I think, alone is not going to is not going to be the end. It's not going to be the transformational end. It's a one of many, many, many different vehicles.
Right. And I love what you said about part of your role as a psychotherapist is the stage of integration of those experiences, right? Help, which makes you a kind of shaman, right?
So
Yeah,
I don't know. Maybe.
it does. Well, you're helping. You're a guide. You're a psychopath, right?
Mhm.
You're helping. It's almost like with teaching. I always tell people with teaching, it's well, you're just kind of there directing things. You're not really doing anything. You're just let's not go over there. Let's stay over here. Right. But you're not really coercing anything. You're just kind of
Yeah,
creating
I mean,
conditions,
it could
right?
be my very kind of feminine consciousness, but I think of myself more like a midwife,
That's
right?
I like that.
It's just, I don't think of myself as a shaman. I guess in my imagination, I have a lot of respect, I think, for that place that exists in. And that midwife is this word that captures that you are certainly present for a miracle, but you didn't make that miracle.
Right.
But you can do things or not do things that help that miracle go well or not. And it is my deepest intent every time that I sit with somebody to have them have the deepest healing and the deepest awareness of God, who is, I feel like, ultimately the divine physician, right? That's going to happen between them and God. And I should also explicitly say, I don't work in a Catholic practice. There are people who work as, I'm a Catholic psychotherapist. I am a Catholic psychotherapist, that's true. But sometimes people come to me and they're atheists, they're not operating from there. And so we start at their highest virtue or their highest value. And so we say, for you, what is the thing of ultimate importance? And that we're gonna begin there. And that I think I'm so fortunate. I get to see the best of people because of that. I mean, I certainly get to see their woundedness, but I get to see people express the thing that means the most to me, the direction I want to grow towards. And it gives me so much faith in people, because the virtue and the value that they often pick out, it's true with a capital T. There's nobody from any religious stripe that would argue with it as being ultimately good.
Yeah, and that's what I saw in a number of these videos I was watching in preparation, is people saying, even Joe Rogan said, you just felt like God was there and you felt like everything's okay, right? That's a good experience to have, right? Reassurance is a good thing, right?
Yeah, I mean, for me, the in both my own experiences and sitting with other people, to put it in very kind of Catholic language, I began to see that what was happening is either divine will or permissive will all the time. All the time. That this is either God's direct plan, or, okay, this is an indirect way you're going to come home. And that in this indirect way, to have the faith that there's going to be, if this person continues with goodwill and continues to truly seek what's true, good, and beautiful, that their path will be righted. And I know when I've expressed this to other people, that degree of faith is makes them very angry.
Really?
Yeah, that there's a really strong sense of, but that feels very relaxed, Jamie. That we need to be fighting, we need to be struggling, we need to be doing something. And interestingly, I think that a lot of the warfare, the spiritual warfare, that is an archetype of the religious journey for a reason, I think. It's mostly in here. It's mostly in here.
Yeah.
And that when people really are operating from a place of forgiveness and goodwill, they act differently.
Mhm.
Their behaviors begin to kind of take care of themselves. And they really begin to heal. It's kind of amazing.
Yeah. And I think you could call it a kind of initiation too, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because when we talked on the phone, was it last week? One of the things you mentioned is that sometimes psychedelics are a cure for atheism.
Mhm.
Want to
I
talk
mean,
about that a little bit?
yeah, I have, I'm sure it exists because I'm open to all possibilities. But I've never met anybody who has a psychedelic experience that comes out a dogged scientific materialist.
It'd be kind of
Never
tough,
seen it.
right? It'd be kind of tough.
It'd be really
Now,
hard.
the other thing that was interesting to me as I was listening to other people's stories of psychedelics, and this feeling of oneness that they often come to. In fact, even the woman from the 50s we just watched, that's one of the first things she said. I just feel like I'm one with myself and with everything,
Mhm.
which I have to wonder if in the ancient mysteries that was part of the experience, because I don't know if you know this book, but The Golden Ass by Lucius Apuleius.
Mhm. My husband mentioned it, but I'm not
It's
familiar.
the best book ever. It's one of my favorite things ever. And it actually, you would love it because, it culminates in a vision of Sophia.
Mm.
And it's beautiful. And, you know, what's interesting in that is that's when he knows. I mean, that's the gnosis he comes to, is that he's able to rest in God, or the goddess in this case, right?
Mhm.
And you see, and this is what that when you hear about people with their DMT experiences, and probably one of the more common things is that it's more real than real.
Mm.
And I've never done it, so I'm taking the word for it, but almost everyone has said it's more real than real
Mm.
when you're in these experiences. And what I think happens in the mysteries, and I don't know if they were using some kind of psychedelics or they had other ways to get to that place, but and this is where you have the experience of reality at last,
Mm.
right? And what I've been doing in sociology is kind of a way to do that organically
Mhm.
in a way, is to how do we find out what's the real.
And I think it also starts to challenge what we call organically when we think about that. There's aspects of ketamine and MDMA, which we think of as lab synthesized psychedelics, that they relate to fungi, that we just can't get enough bioavailability of it in the fungi. And
Yeah.
so it just starts to get very interesting about what we think of as a non-organic experience.
Well, yeah. And the thing, the DMT people say, the thing is, it's already in your body.
Strawberries.
It's
Mhm.
already in your body too, right?
Well, it's the same thing. We have many receptors,
Mhm.
right, for these. And what does that mean? And what I believe that it means is we have an endogenous capacity, right?
Right.
That I'm fairly certain that some of the great saints were evoking these states through prayer and meditation and contemplation.
Mhm.
And I know that there's a kind of purist, it is pure. That's quite amazing. I think that there's kind of a purist bias towards this. And then there's also another idea that exogenous, where does endogenous and exogenous begin and end? That's an interesting psychedelic question, right?
For
What's
sure.
inside and outside starts to kind of become interesting. So I think there's many, many non-drug ways to have a psychedelic state. I mean, even here, I know I live in California, so we're kind of, we have all the extra stuff in a way, but like
Yeah.
people can go 15 minutes from my house and close themselves up into a completely enclosed and darkened float tank, right? And
Yeah.
they can have an experience that is a non-drug experience. And I'm sure that I have had glimmers of connection through the rosary.
Mhm.
I really believe that.
Yeah.
my dreams are a really important part of my life. I mean, that's how my background as a psychotherapist. I went to Pacifica Graduate Institute.
Oh, really? I didn't know.
Yeah. So that's a fairly Jungian world. And then
Yeah.
I just completed a certificate with the C.G. Jung Center here in Los Angeles. And, you know, Jung has been, go into your dream.
Yeah.
Go into your dream and you will find what is true. And Jung came out, you could see interviews of saying, somebody said to him, Carl Jung, do you believe in God? And he said, I don't have to believe, I know.
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
And if these experiences lead people to an I know that there is a God, I can't help but believe that that is the beginning of them being on their way. And I don't know if every drug experience guarantees that.
Mm-hmm. No, it's interesting. I didn't know you went to Pacifica.
Yeah.
We actually interviewed, Mike and I interviewed not too long ago, Daniel Polikoff, if you know him.
I think you mentioned him to me.
Okay, yeah, because he went there as well, or he taught there. So why don't you, can you describe, I mean, so if you're working with these substances with your clients, how does that go? What's the process?
Sure. So here in California, the only legal psychedelic drug is ketamine.
Okay.
So,
and describe what ketamine is for our
sure.
listeners.
So ketamine is a dissociative anesthetic, and ketamine has been used in the operating room and in many, many other capacities other than in mental health for a very long time. But when people found that certain dosages of ketamine were used in the context of psychotherapy, well, I should say even more, it first was researched just medicinally outside of the context of psychotherapy, sort of like Prozac or one of these other drugs. Could people receive ketamine infusions and get well with things like treatment-resistant depression? And ketamine is also used in psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy, which is the work that I do. So some people who work with me also have experiences not with ketamine, with DMT and psilocybin. Some of them are traveling abroad and having those experiences. Some of them are having experiences like, ayahuasca tourism is like enormous. People are having these very big experiences and then coming back and wanting to integrate those experiences in the States. So I see the only people with whom I sit with medicine is with ketamine. And it's been beautiful for people who have treatment-resistant depression and who have to take the label off of it in a way and to talk about what I see in them is this incredibly rigid pattern of thinking and feeling and behaving. And what it appears that the ketamine seems to do is create this inner fluidity and flexibility. So many, many people in a very colloquial way come into therapy just saying, I'm stuck in my life in one way or another. And I'm hurting because we are always hurting when transformation isn't happening.
Right.
And so that's where most of the research with ketamine really began, was in treatment-resistant depression and then disorders of rigidity, like obsessive compulsive disorders or things that take on those types of manifestations. So I sit with people with medicine with ketamine. So we do their preparation, their medicine, and their integration sessions. And I work with a prescriber because I'm a psychotherapist. I don't prescribe. So I work with a prescriber. And then I also have somebody who is a mentor to me and supervises me, not with the kind of policing that kind of word gives, but that's the technical term for it here in California. But she's somebody who has been in this world. She was part of the original MAPS researcher, and then she went on to do specific training in ketamine work. So that's a really, really important piece of doing this work
Right.
is collaborating. And then I also have other mentors who I work with. I have people who are in my psychedelic community who are 85 years old and who were around the first time this was,
Yeah.
legal. I've had people who are mentors who went through, like you said, watching lots of people who do psychedelics who never came back. Right. So that feels really important to me too, because I am newer to this work, to be in contact with people who've been doing this for a long time. The piece that I feel like I'm not as new per se with, that has been a thread line of the past 12 years, though somebody could say you're new at dream work forever. I've been working with people with their dreams and their art since day one as a therapist. And then there's a lot of overlap. With
so how long does a ketamine trip last?
About, depending on how you receive the medicine, whether you take it orally or whether you receive it in your bloodstream, it's through injection or
Right.
through intravenous, I should say more specifically. It can be between 60 minutes and at maximum, I've seen 2 hours.
Okay. And so you'll be with the client as they go through that?
Yeah.
Okay. It's not like you give it to them, take two of these and call me in the morning kind of thing,
Well,
right?
it depends. So with oral ketamine, for example, oral ketamine is approved in California for home use. So,
Okay.
I mean, we are able to, in preparation sessions with really, in my, how I work, I should say, I shouldn't speak for every psychedelic assisted psychotherapist, but if somebody is a very kind of well-supported person in their life, they have a lot of resources around them for safety and for support, they can have somebody who's a trusted sitter be at home with them while they have their medicine experience, and then usually go to sleep through the night, and then I will see them in the morning.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. But really, especially for people who are having these experiences for the first time, I would love to be their trusted person from day one, but sometimes I'm not. And sometimes it's better that their mom sit for them or their grandma sit for them, that they are their safer person than I am at this point.
Because feeling safe is an important component of that, right?
Very important. Very important.
Now, I don't know if you can answer this, but what would be your preferred substance to use if everything was legal? If I mean, maybe there's not, maybe it's this for this situation, this for another situation.
I think your second point is something to consider. I think there are certain medicines that I'm open to the idea that they could be more beneficial for some things than others. I think the universality that I see of all, if we become substance neutral and we look at the trip or the journey itself, that I'm more looking for what is the state of sort of the heart that the person is able to arrive in. How do they arrive regardless of substance because I believe that this is really key to being able to kind of integrate an experience of God, is whether or not a person is calm, connected, clear, curious. These are all Richard Schwartz's words in a lot of ways. These are not my ideas, but and I think that could be different substances for different people. But I think MDMA has like extraordinary potential, and I think in part that's why it's had so much interest.
And what MDMA
is a substance that they call an empathogenic. And in a pathogenic, really the gift in an MDMA experience is deeply heightened states of mercy. Mercy for oneself, for this world, and for the other. And so also I think most people who've had an experience with that substance would come back and say at the center of that experience was love.
Really? Okay.
And I think that is, this is non-recreational MDMA. I'm saying there's plenty of people who take MDMA and they go to a club and they're doing something different. But even some of those come back and say they had a big connected experience, but used really intentionally. I mean, people can go and watch videos about that online and read about that online, what MAPS has been doing with MDMA. And we're poised really for legalization here in California and Colorado and other places for that to come on board. Some people at one point were saying as early as, I think it was like Q2 of 2024 at one point.
Okay.
So that so some medicines are very internally preoccupying, where there's and there's something specific about MDMA that is interconnected with others that I think is the relational component of it is very, very helpful. Yeah.
That's interesting. By the way, little aside, last late summer, I raise cows, right?
Yeah.
And there was psilocybin mushrooms growing in my compost pile. I let them go, but I didn't tell the kids what they were. But and so that's all fascinating stuff. So I guess, I mean, because I what I hear you saying and and I think this is the kind of kid I was and the kind of kid you were, it's Viktor Frankl, right? It's man's search for meaning. And this is what I think, from what a lot of the people I know has drawn them to these substances is a deepening of meaning in their lives and feeling, and that probably you must see this a lot with people who come there saying they're stuck. I would just say that's probably code for I don't have any meaning. I need to find something.
I think that's a nice way of putting it.
Yeah.
Or two things. I don't have any meaning and I'm disconnected. That I don't feel like I am integrated and belonging to the world that I'm in. And when people feel that kind of remoteness, I mean, that's hell. Feeling remote from God, feeling remote from belonging. That's a hell state. I don't know if that's a final destination, but that's certainly a hell state when we feel like we are remote from everything that's real and true and good. And so I think that meaning doesn't cure belonging. I think our ultimate wish, at least my hunch, is to be incorporated into the body of Christ in our Christian language, is to feel my incorporation into the web of life. And that when we don't feel that, we feel like we need to figure it out intellectually. So we think a lot, and then that becomes a kind of exhausting trap.
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, let's talk about Catholicism and psychedelics and your profession, right? So how's that work out?
I mean, I feel like I I don't know. That's my honest, faithful answer. Is
Now,
that
have you talked to any people in church about these
Sure.
kinds of things, or do you know any other Catholic psychotherapists who maybe have Catholic psychotherapists on their shingle?
No, I don't. I don't know of any Catholic psychotherapist yet. Because I think that most people's experience with drugs is the shadow of drugs, is addiction and compulsivity and all kinds of really truly dangerous things that can come. But I think that there's also a medicinal aspect of drug. I'll give you a great example. We receive in the ER opiates, and we don't all leave the ER opiate addicts because we're in a setting of healing. We use it in its context. However, if we receive opiates in a little brown bag coming home from the hospital, and we go into the setting of, I hate my job, my wife is leaving me, my child won't speak to me, that medicine takes on a different shape, right? So the medicine, the drugs in and of themselves elicit fear because there's a real shadow. It's true. And I think we need to more look at the human person rather than the substance in the responsibility that in part, the human being that was the prescriber, the system that we're in, the human being that's the individual taking it, that we all matter in the equation of whether or not there's a terrible outcome from this encounter with a medicine. So, with Catholics that I've spoken to, there's many who just, it's right there in the catechism that it says that the use of drugs, it inflicts, I think the wording is, it inflicts grave damage, except on strictly therapeutic grounds. And I am not in favor of recreational drug use. Like, that is so not my thing. Like, this is really in terms of therapeutic grounds. I also am desperate for these medicines to come out of clandestine use and because secrecy is where demonic things happen. And so when this comes out into the light, that there is a lot more opportunity to look at how, first of all, to not be directly cooperating in tons of evil that can happen with the production of these medicines. Right. Or the distribution of them. So that's all a big quandary right now. And so that's the benefit that I see from legalization, is that dimension of real darkness has an opportunity to come into the light and be healed. So that's how it works. Things have to come into surface to be seen and healed. That secrecy is really awful. And that the therapeutic use of these medicines is something different than, some of the really kind of crass use of drugs that's out there. Yeah.
Good. So you make me think now, because we're talking in terms of the psyche, right? But what I'm, and this came up in especially in people's experiences of DMT. What is it? What is this realm that people enter into with these substances?
I wonder.
Is it a purely interior psychological drama, or is it something else? That was the question a lot of people were having is, well, it could be that. It could be you're seeing a different dimension of reality.
Or it could be that same thing of exogenous and endogenous of, where does God end and I begin? Right? And how big is that spark of Christ that's in me? Right? And that doesn't mean that I believe that I'm God or something like that at all. I certainly don't. But where does my access begin? And that a lot of people imagine, especially us Catholics, that God is very far away, very, very far away, high in the sky. I gotta climb a lot of ladders. We have a lot of ascending imagery in our world.
That's right.
As opposed to kind of what I think you are onto, which is the Sophianic view, which is we are breathing the breath of God right now. And that God is right here. And when we live like that, we live so differently. And so I don't know. I don't really know the answer to that question of where are we in that moment. I think that's part of everybody's lore about psychedelics is, what is this space? And there's a part of me that's inclined to think it's a state of being that we get into that is in attunement with God for a minute there, just like in prayer, that like tuning two instruments, that you're attuned to one another. And then as the fear and the pride and all of the stuff that we know comes back with ordinary consciousness, we can lose that attunement. And then the integrative job is, how do I get it back?
Right.
Right. And so when I sit and do my rosary, it's not just banging out 10 beads to appease the taskmaster God, but it's really,
I checked off all the prayers.
Exactly. It's more literally, how do I cultivate the being of Mary in myself,
right,
as I imagine and walk myself through these mysteries, and how do I keep the ground of my very being in that space of her, because that's the only way I will have God in me. And so those types of experiences where we have a very embodied experience of God, I think is what happens sometimes with psychedelics, is that some of that remoteness can be clarified, that God is not so far away. And that I think when people can feel that God is right there,
right,
that is a giant game changer for most people. Yeah.
No, because what you're describing here reminds me of, I think what we're talking about with these substances is people taking them, they have a kind of immersive experience in reality and in truth, beauty, and goodness, potentially, right? Which is almost like becoming a child again, right?
Which we're told to do biblically, huh?
Well, exactly. And this is what Thomas Traherne's entire body of work is an instruction manual about how to become a child again. And I'm sure what you deal with in your practice is people who have been, whether traumatized or just damaged by a dreadful culture, a dreadful education that has damaged them beyond belief and battered. And you mentioned, how prayer can bring us to the first thing I thought of was the visionaries at Fatima.
Yeah.
We're just kids, and little kids at that, right? Who had no problem seeing the Virgin Mary. The same with Saint Bernadette, right? And people would say, well, I don't see her. How do you mean you don't see her? She's right there. She's right there. I just touched her. Right. So, and so what, why aren't we there? What is it that takes us out of that garden?
I wonder in part if we're meant to live there full time. Yet I'm still alive. And while I'm still alive in this kind of ordinary state, maybe I will be there full time. And, this is one of the incredible things. One of the beautiful things that's going on with psilocybin right now, I think it's at Johns Hopkins, if I recall, is about end of life care and hospice.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems to allow people who were very afraid to die to face death, which in my purview means facing life more courageously and opportunistically. I have an opportunity to die. And that's incredible. I do want to say, because we've spent 58 minutes talking about everything except for what is colloquially called a bad trip. And I think we should talk about that.
Yeah, let's
because
go
that
there.
feels like covering it all in a sense as best as we can. Maybe not at all, but I think that bad trips give us a really big opportunity to learn what redemptive suffering is. And that is a really lost, nobody wants to go through redemptive suffering. We've all gone through plenty of things.
No thanks.
No thanks. So nobody wants to sign up for a bad trip. So everybody's fear of a bad trip is absolutely valid. Absolutely valid. And I think that with really good preparation, especially for Christians who have this tradition of redemptive suffering, to say, I have the courage to encounter what God will bring me in my healing. I will have the right people, whether that's my priest or a spouse or a therapist or a dear friend or whoever. I will have faithful people to walk with me on the other side of that experience. That openness. It's not an asking for it, but and also to really just like with any other wound that a person experiences, that we don't just have mercy for people who are wounded accidentally. That's not our call. We're supposed to have mercy for everyone. So if somebody takes LSD and they have a terrible trip, to remember that if that person was taking that action in goodwill, they wanted to heal and they wanted to know what God was, and they set themselves up as best as they could, and they had this, experience of suffering, that to trust in their own goodwill, that the people around them are able to say,
Yeah, and actually,
do
some of
the
the video, I think it was the video we looked at the clip of. In the comments, a couple people talked about taking LSD and having bad trips, but how valuable that was.
Yeah.
To go through that, right? Yeah.
I mean, I do this work with a couple bad trips under my belt. And may I not willingly have one again? No, thank you. And also some of the greatest fruit that I've ever been given has come out of that. And so there's also thank you, God. So it's truly, it's truly a redemptive suffering experience, in my opinion.
Now, so how often do you work this way with your clients?
It's not necessarily the majority of my practice. Like right now, for example, I have 3 people doing psychedelic work and probably about, 12 not, but they're doing, drug work, I should say, those 3 people are working with medicine, but the rest of the people that I work with are usually working in some way with their dreams, in some way with art. And some of them are just problem solving in their imagination with me, so it just probably will depend on what. Not everybody that comes into practice with me, does it look like, that's the best route that we should go down.
And so I'm sure you have colleagues working in the same field, right? And what's their feeling about how things are and where they're going? What's
Oh.
what's the vibe out there?
Oh, there's so much. I mean, we just got off of a giant conference in Colorado. So there's a lot of excitement and potential. There was a big psychedelic conference in Denver. You know, I think that all the things, as they say these days, right? It's like people are very excited, people are very angry, people are very scared, people they have a sense that something powerful is coming into the hands of the general public, and that's got its risks and benefits, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm.
The scariest part to me, if I'm really honest, is there's some ugly stuff going on with people wanting to synthesize psilocybin and trademark it. That's
Oh, really?
Yeah. So there's some of that
I
ugliness.
didn't know Bill Gates knew about it.
Mhm.
Sorry.
Or I think that we can see here in California, for example, even like with cannabis legalization that happened here, you know, now there, you know, giant corporate entities and giant non-corporate and criminal entities have entered into a sphere that was, you know, families of pot farmers for generations, you know, out in Humboldt.
Yeah.
So I would predict we're going to have the same thing, because people will recreationally abuse these drugs. And that's going to be, unfortunately, a market. And there are going to be people who are going to capitalize on that. And it is going to hurt people. That's for real. So the people who are doing intentional work and are really trying to be really reverent, I think are so important. And that if there is kind of a stigma amongst Christians around this,
I'm sure there is.
I'm sure there is.
Yes, there is.
I think that it really needs to be looked at really carefully.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really one of the themes Mike and I cover a lot on the channel is the small is beautiful aspect of things. And that's the problem when the corporations get involved, you know, and the legalization of cannabis. We can call it pot, but and it was interesting. So what I remember when I was a kid, and I talk about this with my college students. It's kind of funny because I'll ask them, I don't know, I'm out of the loop. What kind of stuff's out there nowadays? And I tell them how cheap marijuana was when I was a kid, and I hear how expensive it is now, and how strong it is now.
Mm-hmm.
It's so much stronger than it was when I was a kid. And the same thing, if you, like you mentioned, when people are going to start synthesizing psilocybin, you know, it's like Starbucks. You know what I mean?
And like that's why I really hesitate around the word, for example, of shaman or shamaness. That's something people have been doing for thousands of years. I'm not going to come in and play shaman. Right. That's also not I don't know that is necessary in the kind of way that we imagine that as Western people. You know, I think we've all had a midwifery kind of experience where somebody's carried us through something. But yeah, there's even that kind of experience, I think, is being trademarked. I think people in my field, some of them understand themselves in that way. And I think there's a risk and a benefit to that.
Right. And I think with the marijuana thing, my suspicion, the reason it's becoming legal everywhere is because it's so strong, it'll keep people docile. Right. Right. There's one aspect of it. If they're just watching Netflix and smoking dope, we can do whatever we want to do. And I would think with psychedelics, it would take that up a few notches, right?
I mean, the thing that is hard about psychedelics is that psychedelics will bite you back, right? So, you know, I think marijuana eventually bites people back too. I mean, I've really seen that, if it is a medicine to be respected. Like if I could just underline that, these plants and substances, they are I believe intended to be used with consciousness. So they will bite you back, but psychedelics bite you back fast. And I think that I think that's going to happen, not in a vengeful way, just as kind of a natural repercussion with some of these corporations that are looking to do kind of a commercial explosion of psychedelics, that's in their imagination, that will have such an awful blowback that whatever investment has been made there, I suspect will be lost. That is such a dangerous proposition.
Yeah, there's a lot of danger there. Absolutely, a lot of danger there. So go back one more thing.
Okay.
You mentioned Christianity and Christians, and you're a practicing Catholic. And so I know there will be a lot of people, Christians, watching this interview going, wait a minute, hold this, you're not supposed to do that. What do you say to them?
I guess in part I start with it's a good question. I don't know that I would have a blanket statement, right? That it's like each human being has a different concern. I believe that their anger or their
Anxiety,
correction of me that they feel is necessary, it comes from a really good place, that they are wanting to protect and preserve what they feel is incredibly important. And so I have a lot of respect for that.
Right.
I think all each of us can do is be as earnest and sincere and prayerful as we can with what we're putting out into this world. And I ask for their charity in seeing me that way.
That's beautiful.
That's all.
That's good. It's a good place for us to start to wrap up. So if people are interested in your work, where can they look?
Oh, they can go to my website. It's not much. It's jamiekohanyi.com. You can
And we'll link that into the video.
Sure.
On YouTube. And any parting words?
No, this was great.
This has been great for me too.
Yeah.
It's so nice to actually talk to you and see your face in real time. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? We've talked on the phone a few times.
Yes.
But this is better.
Yeah.
Maybe next time we'll be in real close proximity.
Yeah.
Physical proximity. Wouldn't that be nice?
That'd be so good.
Well, thank you so much, Jamie. And thank you everyone for listening to the Regeneration Podcast. We'll see you next time. God bless.
God bless you. Bye-bye.